The year is 2008. A secluded genius who has a difficult and fraught relationship with the media emerges from seclusion to deliver his latest masterpiece upon the public. It is well received by some fans, but panned by the media. Now, if you thought I was talking about Kanye West and 808s and Heartbreak, you would be mistaken, because while that album was released in 2008, the album that was released the same week as 808s and Heartbreak and charted at number 2 behind it was none other than Guns N Roses' Chinese Democracy. Now, it's been about, I'd say, 12 or 13 years since that album, and at the time it was highly panned and considered not a Guns N' Roses album. It was considered an Axl Rose solo vanity project. But I feel like enough time has passed that we can take an objective look at Chinese Democracy and really assess, was it the artistic opus masterpiece that Axl Rose intended, or was it just the strange ramblings of a Howard Hughes-ish figure from the pre-grunge era stumbling and being clumsily birthed into the 21st century? Let's take a deep dive. So, if you're a bit younger and you weren't really a teenager before 2008, you don't really know the length of how Chinese democracy jokes permeated society omnipotently. The biggest thing when I was a kid is, yeah, I'll turn in that homework assignment when Axl releases Chinese Democracy. Basically became a meme in how much time Axl was taking to release this album, and how even if it was released, it would have to be such a masterpiece on an unprecedented scale to justify the delay between 1993's underwhelming covers album, The Spaghetti Incidents, and the aforementioned Chinese Democracy. That it was released the same week as 808s and Heartbreak to me is not a coincidence. There's some kind of cosmic order there. Recording history of Chinese Democracy, aside from the meme, was fraught with frustration, false starts, redos, edits, producer changes, personnel changes, musical direction changes, that it would be a whole other video to go over the entire creation of the album, but I'll try to sum it up briefly. Basically, in 1993, after Guns N' Roses released The Spaghetti Incident, the tensions in the band had really become untenable for the original lineup. After the Use Your Illusion tour, Axl Rose had demanded sole ownership of the name Guns N' Roses. And as far as the accounts from everybody else I can tell, after having read Slash's book when I was a teenager and then subsequently Duff McKagan's, is that everyone was just so burnt out after the Use Your Illusion tour that they basically just acquiesced and gave Axl the rights to the name in hopes that it would calm the seas and allow the band to continue. As we know from history, this very much was not the case. The dysfunction continued throughout the recording of the Spaghetti Incident, ultimately leading to the fact that by 1996, all original members of Guns N' Roses were out, and we were left with basically just Axl and a cadre of hired guns. Duff McKagan was the last to leave in 1997, but even then, by that point, he was not really involved in the making of the band's follow-up album to the Spaghetti Incident, Chinese Democracy. Now, here's where it gets super interesting. If you listen to Use Your Illusion 2, it has one of the strangest ending tracks until 2013 when Kanye released Bound 2 off of Yeezus, in that, like Bound 2, the song My World has almost nothing to do with the entirety of the album that precedes it.
You want to step into my world? It's a socialist psychotic state of bliss.
It is a strange, caustic, claustrophobic, pseudo-industrial track that almost sounds like Axl attempting to do his best Faith No More impression, but coming off a bit strange because it's Axl Rose, and also we had just, if you've listened to Use Your Illusion 2, you've just sat through an hour of classic Guns N' Roses guitar, majestic rock, and then you get this strange claustrophobic industrial thing that is My World. Although the reason I bring this track up is to mention this ended up being kind of prescient for what Axl wanted to do with Guns N' Roses in the 90s, which ended up initiating his demand for the name and the subsequent dispersal of everyone from the original lineup. That is because Axl saw the future of rock and roll as very much industrial based, Nine Inch Nails, Faith No More, that kind of thing. And I don't necessarily disagree with that assessment. I think the idea of injecting fresh life into Guns N' Roses in the 90s as the post-grunge, and when I say post-grunge, I don't mean Nickelback, but like the post-grunge rock era began, I think incorporating new influences like that was actually an exciting prospect. The problem was that the original guys, as I said, were not on board with the idea. And Axl, while he took the innovations of Nine Inch Nails and Faith No More and bands like that, that's kind of where his new musical input stopped. This will become important later. Anyways, the point is to say that during the fraught false starts in the 90s of the recording of Chinese Democracy, not much happened and a lot was scrapped and re-recorded, though we did get a bit of evidence of the sound that Axl was trying to go for in 1999 when the song Oh My God was released on a soundtrack to a movie I totally forget, but I will insert here in the video. Guns N' Roses released Oh My God in 1999 with Axl, and at this point, Buckethead, I believe, on guitar, but if I'm wrong, I'll insert the text here of who was really in the band. But I know at this point, Buckethead had, if not entered the band, was in the process of entering the band. Chris Pittman was on keyboards at this point. I will insert the names of everybody in the new 90s Axl lineup here because I can't remember them all at the moment. But anyways, these guys had entered, and Oh My God debuted, and it was strange. It was, again, similar to My World, this new Guns N' Roses sound for the 90s, but it almost felt like a premature birth. It seemed like Axl hadn't quite worked out all the kinks of what a Guns N' Roses for the 90s would sound like, and the 90s were over at this point. This was 1999. So it was strange. People were excited to hear a new Guns N' Roses song, but then again, we fall into this period of dysfunction and re-records and false starts. And the next prominent thing that happened is that Guns N' Roses actually plays the 2001 or 2002, I can't remember, I'll insert it again here, VMAs with the new lineup, and Axl in dreadlocks, way before the conversation about cultural appropriation was a thing. We have Axl in dreadlocks basically trying to assume a sort of new metal vibe, which was very strange. It seemed like Axl was trying to play catch up with the rock trends as they kept evolving. And so basically they play the VMAs in 2001 and 2002. Leaks continue throughout the 2000s, and I remember this. I was in middle school and high school at this point of Chinese Democracy. We heard leaks from Madagascar, IRS, and things like this. But the joke was, this is never going to happen. This is like never going to happen, right? And then all of a sudden there's this strange campaign from Dr. Pepper, of all people, basically daring Axl Rose to release Chinese Democracy. I remember this so clearly because there was this meme on the internet like, does Slash get a Dr. Pepper? Because at this point, the bad blood was quite solidified between Axl Rose and the original members of Guns N' Roses. In fact, and at that point, Velvet Revolver, I believe, was still going strong, and there was just no interest in reconciliation. And basically, Dr. Pepper issued this challenge, like I said, that if Axl Rose released Chinese Democracy, everybody in America would get a free Dr. Pepper. Internet historian needs to look into that. If that actually ended up happening, I don't even remember if they fulfilled that promise. But that was the meme, and sort of everyone laughed like, aha, again, another thing, you know, hell will freeze over, the pigs will fly before Chinese Democracy is released. But then something kind of crazy happened, and it was. Like, Axl just dropped the record the same week as Kanye's 808 and Heartbreak. And I just remember being like, these two crazy enigmatic geniuses are debuting their new records the same week in totally new directions. And I believe, if I recall, Kanye was number 1, Axl was number 2. And it was like the most crazy week musically in my young life. Like, oh my God, the new Guns N' Roses record is actually out. Like, this isn't a fucking drill. It's actually released. And so I, of course, bought the CD at Tower Records, showing my age there a little bit, and was like super excited to get into like, what, you know, is this? I liked it. I actually liked the record. And the thing is, I want to make this video because I want to talk about, like, is Chinese Democracy a genius, groundbreaking record? No. But I think it was the record that pointed the way that Guns N' Roses could have gone had it been released in like 96 or 97. And had they built upon that foundation in Chinese Democracy, it could have been like this is maybe will be laughable to some people, but it could have been like a Radiohead OK Computer to Kid A moment. Like, had they released Chinese Democracy in the mid-90s and it had been this massive thing, I think they could have built on those foundations, furthered those innovations, and really Axl could have started like a phase 2, a Mark II of Guns N' Roses that was super relevant for the 90s in a new way and really built upon the legacy of this band beyond Appetite for Destruction. That being said, Chinese Democracy in and of itself is a bit confused. And I want to revisit it because it's not as bad as the critics said. And it does have a lot of really interesting things that, again, I think could have led to more interesting and amazing things. But just because of the timing, it didn't. But let's go over the record as it is. So the thing about Chinese Democracy that is confusing is you can tell that the false starts and the changing of personnel and re-recording of solos and re-recording of songs and remixing of things is apparent in the record, because it seemed like Axl started in a direction of this industrial electronica, like influences from not only Nine Inch Nails but like Prodigy and some of the more intense like electronica of the late 90s, and then sort of lost confidence as the record was not released and that style faded. It seems like on a couple points in the record, like for example, you take a song like If the World, right, which has a sort of Chemical Brothers type influence with Guns N' Roses style hard rock guitars filtered through like a Nine Inch Nails filter. Super interesting. But then a couple songs earlier, you have a song like Street of Dreams, which basically sounds like the best ballads off of the Use Your Illusion things, which I love. I mean, that's great, but it was just a bit surprising to hear pieces on Chinese Democracy that really called back to 1990 and 1991 so viscerally, when the idea had been Axl was done with the pre-Nirvana rock aesthetic and was trying to do something super new. And it seemed like he started in a couple songs, like in the song There Was a Time. That, I think, is the best example of this new direction for Guns N' Roses that could have been so vital. We have drum loops. We have like a choir singing in a sort of very haunting, almost ambient-esque style. Super filtered guitars that are like compressed but kind of small sounding, like they're just little inserts. The guitar is not driving the song, which is very new for Guns N' Roses. And then later we have this epic entrance of all the sort of classic Guns N' Roses thing. And that, to me, was the moment where I really loved Chinese Democracy. I thought, yes, this is interesting. To me as a musician who likes musically diverse stuff, I was like, yes, Axl could go in this direction and do this thing, and we can go in this new thing. But again, throughout the record, it seemed like he doubled back and was too apprehensive to go all the way, because like I said, you have these songs like Street of Dreams, you have these songs like Catcher in the Rye, where it's basically just a Use Your Illusion redux. But in the best moments, like I said, There Was a Time, or Shackler's Revenge, or the song Better, which to me, Better should have been a massive rock single in 2008, because it really was fresh sounding. It had Axl's voice. It had the classic Guns N' Roses sort of feel, but it was new. It didn't really feel like old Guns N' Roses. It felt like almost like the guitar riff was like an acoustic guitar thing, but just played on electric. Like, it was very strummy, but it was loud, which was very weird. And there was a lot of drum programming on that again pointed in a direction that I thought this could be really awesome and amazing if it's developed further. You know, theoretically, we would have wanted this to be developed further in 1999 with Chinese Democracy released in like 96 or 7, but it pointed a way to something super exciting. And so, to me, Chinese Democracy is not a genius record. I won't go back and say that this is like some underrated thing that is really influential and that, you know, changed rock music. But I do think the critical reception at the time was too harsh, because it stands as an interesting sort of monument to a moment in time that could have been, that was not, but could have been. And then, even though it wasn't, there are still some ideas on the record that I think are really artistic, should not be discounted from Guns N' Roses' discography at all, and I feel like just deserve merit. I mean, like I said, There Was a Time, Better, Shackler's Revenge, these were innovative moments to me that pointed the way to a different kind of Guns N' Roses that we never really got to see. So in terms of Chinese democracy, how I view it, I'll just end with this. I actually think that though it's not really the most interesting record I've ever heard, it's definitely the most interesting record in Guns N' Roses discography, which I am positive the reaction to that statement will be fierce. But I like the world music influences. I like the drum programming. I like this attempt to take the classic Guns N' Roses sound and fuse it with new futuristic influences. I think Axl was on the right track. I just think, the course of fate unfortunately intervened in a way that was unfortunate, but I still think it's a record everyone should listen to. I actually listen to it these days much more than other Guns N' Roses records because of that interesting feel and those ideas that were explored. And then plus, just as a caveat, as a guitar player, the guitar playing on that record is insane. I mean, you have Buckethead making elephant noises on there. You have hyper shred stuff going on that was very different. I mean, if you're a fan of Guns N' Roses, classic Guns N' Roses, Slash is a very identifiable guitar player, but not the most, let's say, technically able, right? And he would even admit that, and it's not a particular concern of his, which I think is fine. I mean, it's all about the music at the end of the day. That being said, some of the guitar work on Chinese Democracy is some of the most incredible stuff I have ever heard, and that definitely, despite its mixed status musically, certainly will never be disputed. And I think some of Axl's best lyrics are on here, frankly. But anyways, I think Chinese Democracy is a record that people should go listen to again. And I think as the years go on, will stand as an interesting footnote of what could have been. But it's not as bad as people said. It's not classic Guns N' Roses, but of course it's not. That was not the point. So Chinese Democracy, Guns N' Roses, super interesting, definitely underrated. I would go back and check it out. And I just wanted to make this video because I feel like no one talks about it, and it's definitely super interesting. So please subscribe to my Patreon. I really, really would appreciate that. And I will